I want to mention that if you have never touched coding before or never used any notebook software, this might be too much for you. But the whole point, I think, is to encourage you to try out what's possible out there. And I'm going to share this presentation at the end after in an email after this session. So you will get all the resources, a lot of things I'll be showing here on YouTube as well. So you can watch those videos again if you didn't catch it during this session. These are just some of the AI tools we have. Its application is really in all the multiple field of text, video, image, coding, speech, 3D research, and a lot of these tools are emerging tools. I'm not going to get detail into this. I'm going to give a brief introduction of what are the basic concepts of large language models. So ChatGPT and among with the other GPT 3.5, GPT 4, these are all large language models. And it is basically a neural network with billion parameter model trained on large quantities of unlabeled text and using self-learning or semi-supervised learning. So it's basically a lot of machines with a lot of computing power running, processing a lot of unlabeled text with a neural network. And how is it different from the other AI stuff we've heard of before? For example, AlphaGo is for playing chess specifically. And if you use natural language processing, you've worked with text labeling, you might like get sentiment analysis from certain content. And that is a specific training model to do that. But large language models can do all kinds of stuff. So this is how it's different from the other AI stuff. It's general purpose models. You can create creative content with it. It's actually before ChatGPT and GPT 3.5 coming out. For GPT 3, it's already really good at doing like creative stuff. The more factual stuff actually come out a bit later. It's good at writing code, solving arithmetic problems, summarizing text, extracting data from documents, extracting information from images, and so on. So this is how it's different. It's ChatGPT accessible. Today we're going to majorly use ChatGPT. It's accessible in most countries. There's probably like 10 that's not accessible. If you do live in one of those countries, you can contact me and we can discuss about that, because I live in a country where it's not accessible. And it has a free tier where you can use, it's just a little bit slow, but anyone can use the GPT 3.5 model in ChatGPT. And we're going to use ChatGPT together with a notebook. If you've never heard of a notebook before, imagine it to be a digital notebook where you can combine text, code, visualization in a single place. Jupyter Notebook, Google Colab, Notable, Kaggle, these are all notebooks, all notebook platforms. And it's like having an interactive coding playground where you can run and write code snippets, and you can view the output in like interactive ways, and you can add explanations or comments along the way. I do want to introduce this concept of hallucination right at the beginning of this training. Hallucination in like large language models refers to the generation of outputs that may sound plausible, but are either factually incorrect or unrelated to the given input. So it could basically just make up stuff. If you're asking it about factual things, like, for example, what are the LGBTQ groups in Iran? And they can just give you a bunch of names, a bunch of URLs, but if you click on it, you might find it doesn't exist at all. So that is the notable obstacle to adoption of large language models as research tools for now. But I think with time, it would possibly get better, but we need to have this in mind and always double check its answer or the code it gives us. Then we're gonna go through a few preparing steps of registering on OpenAI and registering on Notable. I'm not gonna go through detail about these things. Basically, you need your email address for registering OpenAI, which is a company ChatGPT is a product of. And after you put in your email, your password, it will ask you a little bit about your information, and then it will ask for your phone number for verification. And you can watch this YouTube video if you have not registered yet. And Notable, it's a similar process, which doesn't even need your phone number. You just need your email address, and you can register on their website. And today, I'm going to be using the ACLED data, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, for analyzing Nigerian election-related violence. So this is a database of basically all the conflicts happened in the world since 1997 to now. And it covers, it also does its own analysis online. And now today we're just taking a bunch of data from the platform. And usually you need to read the documentation of the data for what it actually means. But today we're just gonna go through it really quickly because we want to focus on the ChatGPT and Notable part. Okay, so now I'm inside Notable. This is what it looks like after you registered. I've started a few projects, but now we're gonna start a new project under the space. I'll just call it demo 2. Just to mention that I'm using Notable because I find it more user-friendly or for beginners, for people who have never used Notebook before. And also because this recent plugin that came out, I think in May, that makes it really easier to work with ChatGPT. So you can see there is already one notebook. Once you started this project, I'm just gonna upload the data file I pre-downloaded from ACLED. Okay, so we see this data file is here. Let's take a quick look at it. So Notebook gives you this nice view of the data with the record count and the distribution, like basically a histogram of what the data looks like. For example, you can see here there's 4 categories of this order. Let's just go through the columns quickly. This event ID, when did the conflict happen, what year, the type of disorder, the event type, 6 categories, sub-event type. The actors are actually the 2 sides of the conflict. You can see actor 1 and actor 2, and this is a coding for what happened between these 2 actors, but we're not going to use it today. Whether it's targeting civilians, ISO of the country, what's the region, what's the country, the administration level, different administration levels. For Nigeria, this would be the states or the provinces. Administering might be municipalities. The detailed location where this happened, longitude and latitude, the source, and the notes, the fatalities, and the text. So we can see here, it seems like there is a lot of text here. I'm just going to drag this along a little bit. We can find it easily if we want to look for Nigeria election related data. We can find it.
So yeah, so it looks like we lost Yuxi for just 1 second. I'll touch base and get back with her in just a minute. Thank you for your patience and sorry for the inconvenience.
Okay, yeah, I think we were looking at the data before, and we were thinking it's easy to find where Nigeria is because there's a country column, and it's easy to find like the date column. But the problem we face here is where is the election related stuff. I'm not sure from this data. I'm just going to search in this table section. And we can see it's already doing some filtering. And if we do a search of this page, we can see it's actually on this notes column. Okay, so now we know how to filter, or where should we look for data about Nigeria election-related violence. And then we go back to our notebook and in our new notebook. And what we want to do right now is to drag this data in this notebook because it haven't read the data in. I'm not sure how to do that. I'm just going to ask ChatGPT. I have an ACLED data set. I want to load it into Notable. My data files path is this. Which model? Okay, it's not giving me the code. Okay, now it's giving me how to read the CSV file in Pandas. I'm just going to copy the code. You can read the detail explanation ChatGPT gives. Okay, so actually we don't need this print. Usually we'll just say, we will just print, like put the df here and it will show the data here. So I'll just get rid of the print so it's easier to look at. Okay, we've got our data and it's printing out the first few rows. So it's loading a little bit slow, and it's the same table we were looking at just now. And ask ChatGPT to show me the basic information of this data set. So basically, ChatGPT can't really see the data, but I can see the data and I can run the code. So I'm like doing this copy and pasting, basically like transforming messages from in between these two different apps. Just copy the code and run in here. So it's giving me these are 22,000 records, 31 columns, and these are the different column names, the summary statistics. And this also that gives me the data types of different columns. I'm going to copy the data types and column names to ChatGPT. This might not be necessary, but I just generally do this so I have a better idea of my data structure. And it's repeating what I just said. Now I'll ask it to filter the data to election-related violence happened in Nigeria since October 2022. This is just random data I selected. And I also tell it my date columns look like this. If we go to our data, this is how the date column looks like this, because sometimes these data are not in a standard format and it could cause problems when you are parsing data. And so this could be a problem like when you are coding yourself as well. So I'm just putting a note here. I've run without this sentence. Sometimes it's ChatGPT will help me parse the date column. Sometimes it won't. So it's inconsistent. It's doing this again. So I'm just copying the rest of the code, which I haven't copied before. So interestingly, I asked ChatGPT to look for election-related violence. But what it did is actually it went inside event type and looked for violence against civilians. which is not the thing I was looking for. And we can see ChatGPT is running into a problem because it can't find like where should I find election related data? Where do I know? So this is something I would need to flag to ChatGPT because it's not seeing my data. You should search for election related keywords in the notes column. Okay, so it's a similar thing. I'm just copying its code. So interestingly, what it's doing now, it's trying to find the event type that is violence against civilians, and the notes contains elections, or notes contains vote. This part actually makes sense, but I don't need event type to be violence against civilians because I am interested in other event types as well. I'll just flag to it. Type to be. So this never happened before. I played around with this same instruction for probably 8 times. And this is the first time it's giving me both violence against civilians and elections and vote. So it's still really useful if you could like understand what it's trying to do, because otherwise now we'll be filtering to a much smaller data set compared to what we want. Okay, let's see if it's doing the right thing now. Okay, this looks right. So it's filtering the date, it's filtered in the country, it's filtering the notes. So we don't need print. Okay, so now we get about 130 records. You can double check this note column if you're not sure if all of them, even though they mention election, they probably are not really about elections. So that takes some manual cleaning. But by far, we are at this stage where we have 130 record about election-related violence. And now I'm just gonna do 2 more instructions with ChatGPT. I'll ask it to filter, analyze this, filter DF, which is just, you can regard this as a table, and make some interactive graphs. I'm not asking any specific questions. We have done the things before, so I'm just gonna copy the rest. Now I have a error. Did I? Oh, sorry, I forgot to copy this part. Okay, now we can see how many different event types among these election-related violence. It's also making this quite useless fatalities event date chart, but we can kind of see like most of these conflict didn't have any fatalities. Only a few have some. I'm just gonna ask one more question. Analyze in which state did these election-related violence happen? Okay, we can see it's a lot of them is in Lagos, in FCT Abuja, and so on. So this is how much demo I'm doing with this free tier ChatGPT, and we can see it's actually running into like new problems that it wasn't before. So I think it's still quite useful if you could read the code, or at least you could understand what it's trying to do here. It also writes the comments down, so it also helps you understand what it's trying to do. And now I'm going to introduce a new tool that's inside Notable.
Again, can we stop for just 1 second, Yuxi? Is that okay?
Sure.
So first of all, folks, can we acknowledge Yuxi? Really extensive preparation, a little bit stressful moment of getting knocked off. So first of all, can we acknowledge Yuxi? What wonderful persistence. Thank you, Yuxi. Is a characteristic of our community. Thank you, Yuxi. So in addition to that, Yuxi, before and there is some nice dialogue going on. Before you go into that other tool, Timo raised an important question, which we talked a little bit about. How do you avoid hallucination? Can you just talk for a minute about that before going in? Because I know there's some, and if others have thoughts about this as well, but thoughts about that, Yuxi, how do you be careful with hallucination? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I would really rely on the audience to answer that question,
Yeah.
because my feeling is you have to understand the content. At least for research, you have to know what it's saying. You have to have some kind of knowledge base to be able to double check it. But I kind of feel with coding, it might be a little bit different, especially if you're doing like software, like relative work that's developing platforms instead of data analysis. It might be like, if it's working, you can actually see it. If it's not working, you can see it's not working. So that's easier to debug compared to like a hallucination related to facts. But with data, it is, I think, dangerous sometimes. Just like what it was doing just now, like it's trying to filter stuff that we don't need it filtering. And if you don't pay attention, you might end up with the wrong data. But from the audience, any
Yeah, I was going to say, no, thank you, Yuxi. Really important points there. And if others have thoughts on that important question that Timo's raised, please feel free to add them in the chat. And then Yuxi, I didn't want to interrupt the flow, but just wanted to signal that one point. So please, yeah, keep going. Thank you so much.
thanks, Jeff. I'm going to share screen again. So what I wanted to show is just this tool inside Notable. This is the data frame we had just now about election-related violence in Nigeria. And if you have used data wrapper before, this is very much like data wrapper. You see there's a visualize button here, and there are suggestions of different visualizations. So we can see it's trying to load a map of where these election-related violence happen in Nigeria. And it's an interactive one. This is not super helpful. Just showing this as an example, and you can actually switch to this view. So this will be the main view of where these election-related violence happened. And if you want to still see the date table, you can create a new view and you just go back to the table. It will load the table again. I'm just going to try a different chart as well, because as I was saying, it's very much like data wrapper. You can choose bar chart, and you can select which column, which is the X axis and Y axis. If we're just making a similar thing to what ChatGPT was doing just now, analyzing the event types, we can give X axis to count, Y axis to event, right? Okay, so this is the same thing basically with what ChatGPT was doing just now, the same graph. So you can like pretty easily make it inside Notable without the help of ChatGPT with this simple tool here as well. And you can actually export this graph as a PNG or download the CSV of this graph. I haven't used it too much, but I think it's could be a useful tool. And you can basically what you need then is just come to Notable, load the data in, and then do some like play around with the visualization, different ways of visualizations. Okay. So now I'm gonna switch back to the Plus user way of using Notable. So just now we've seen how we could use Notable together with ChatGPT with me in the middle copying code around. And with this plugin that's developed by Notable, I believe you don't really need to do that because Notable will be doing that directly. And also, I need to mention that it's actually only available to Plus users now. So you have to pay around $20 per month for subscription for ChatGPT to have access to GPT-4. So as you can see in my Plus user interface, I can have another option of using GPT-4, right? Just now, when we were doing the coding, I was using GPT 3.5, which is free to use by any users. Like you don't need subscription for this. And I'm gonna use the Notable plugin with GPT-4 and to do the same data analysis again, but using this plugin. If you are like a Plus user and you haven't used plugins before, you can come to settings, better features. There's browse with Bing, there's plugins, and you turn this on. Then when you come to GPT-4, you will see these options. And you can click plugins. If you haven't installed any plugin, it will just show as plugin store. And you can search for plugins and install different plugins. Something it's okay. Yeah, it's probably the internet is a little bit slow. And you can install a plugin and then you will be able to start using it. You can use 3 plugins together at the same time. I'm gonna be using Notable here today. I'm gonna start a new notebook. We're gonna do the same analysis. So when you are using Notable together with ChatGPT, you need to share this notebook you are using with ChatGPT. And I'm just gonna copy this I have written. You need to tell my notebook is, so this is the URL of your notebook. Just gonna copy this and paste this in. Just to mention to you, this doesn't mean my notebook is accessible to anyone to edit. I've done the authentication. So when you are using Notable plugin for the first time, it asks you to do the authentication. So ChatGPT knows like ChatGPT is it's the same as my account, so that's why it can edit my notebook. My data files path is the same one. I'm gonna ask it to first load the data and then explore the data. As you can see, what it's doing is it's using Notable. So it's basically gonna write stuff in here without me doing anything. You can see there's already some code here. It's also a good place to mention that GPT-4 is usually much slower than GPT 3.5. And there's a limitation of 25 messages per hour. Okay, so now the data has been successfully loaded. We can see this is our data. It's similar to what we had before. I'm just gonna stop it because it's just copying what the data is like to me. I'm asking it to act as a data scientist, analyze election-related violence in Nigeria at this time period. But at the same time, I'm mentioning my date column is like this, just like before, and I also give it a tape to look for election-themed words in the notes column, just like what we did just now because I knew otherwise it would get stuck there. And if you're a Plus user, your GPT 3.5 usually runs faster than a free tier user. I think I'm probably use the time to come back here and just play around with the word cloud. You can just put the notes column that we were looking for with election related information. And it will make a word cloud of the whole column, or like the whole notes column that's related to elections. So we can see some things like protest, elections, ANIC, and so on. We can see it's been running and it's filtering these data to Nigeria, event date at this time. And it's also thinking of election related keywords, like quite a lot of them, which we wasn't using as much before. Let's see what it's got. Showing the head. So now we have 385 records, which is much more than before because we're using like different keywords. I'm going to leave it like this, but you can easily adjust it. Just delete these, any ones that you think is irrelevant. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to ask a few questions about the data, like a data analyst, and answer with data analysis and interactive data visualizations. So for all these, I just haven't asked any specific questions. I'm just asking it to look at the data, see what's interesting there. And I also asked it to write down the conclusions in Markdown cells. If you have never heard of Markdown before, it's similar. It's basically like Word, like you can have formatted text, so it's easier to read. So I wanted to write the conclusions in those Markdown cells so I can easily read what it's trying to do. It's gonna run for a little bit, but let's see what have it done. So the first question it asks is, what's the frequency of these election-related violence events? And it plotted a bar chart of when these events happened. And we can see most of them happened in March 2023, which is right after the election, which makes sense. And we can see it's write these conclusions nicely in a Markdown cell. So I can see it's analysis one, what it's trying to do. I'm not going to read through. And you can, if you're coding like directly from Notable, you can change. You can write SQL here, you can write Python, you can write Markdown as well. And the second question it asks is, in which locations are these events most common? And we can see it's using the location column and it's Port Harcourt. That's a lot of these election-related events are happening. It's writing down the conclusion. The third question is, what is the distribution of fatalities in these events? And we can see most of these events didn't have any fatalities. It didn't pick up the interactive graph part. You can like make it, you can flag it to ChatGPT again, and it will make interactive graphs. But I think we can already see the power of this thing. And if you didn't follow along with this plugin thing, there are a lot of tutorials out there. I think it's just starting to get popular, this Notable plugin. And I think a lot of these things are super valuable as well. Like even just the questions it's asking is really valuable, as if you just have a data set and you don't know where to start with. I know I'm looking at Nigeria election related violence, but I don't know what specific questions to ask. And it's a great place to start and make ChatGPT asking these questions and trying to solve the problems. Okay, so these are the two demos I'm doing. I do want to mention that Code Interpreter, which is another feature of ChatGPT is probably gonna come out soon. It's right now at alpha state. It's not like in the beta features yet. But what code interpreter will make available is you will be able to run code inside ChatGPT. So now I'm still doing this back and forth thing because ChatGPT can't run code. So I have to, me or Notable plugin have to copy the code inside Notable and make it run the code here. But soon you will be able to run code inside ChatGPT, and you will be able to upload your CSV or data files in this chat box pretty soon. So I'm sure probably like in 2-3 months, this whole plugin thing will be outdated. But this is the like very fast changing landscape we're looking at these days. And if you're interested in code interpreter, you can have a look at the OpenAI website. They have an introduction of it. It's not open to most users yet, even if you are Plus users. And these tutorials online will give you an idea, like basically they're doing the same thing I was doing with a different data set. So if you didn't follow along, you can check them out. Jeff, do we want to stop here for some questions and then we can go forward?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Yuxi. Good thinking on the timing. And again, very nice, Yuxi. Thank you for moving us forward. Thank you, Yuxi.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for everyone's patience.
So, yeah, so there were a couple questions. One was from Sotiris saying, can the interactive graphs be embedded on a web page? So that was one. Sotiris is our data editor at CCIJ. And then Katrin raised a question, which was, hi, I missed the start, so apologies if you already answered the point. Is the reason we are using Notable and not Jupyter Kaggle as the notebook because ChatGPT integrates better with Notable somehow? So Yuxi, if you don't mind speaking to those, some general thoughts. If anybody has other questions, we can put them in the chat. Then we'll start to wrap up and share the evaluation and information about the next training session and so on. So Yuxi, those two questions, please.
Yeah, so I think what ChatGPT was using was like Plotly, which is a library in Python, and I didn't see the possibility of embedding the interactive graphs. You can like download the pictures of what it's, I think I've already closed the web page, but you can download the pictures, you can play around with it, but it's not providing like the embedding feature of interactive graphs. But I know there are some other libraries that might be able to do that. I know some mapping libraries, you can embed the map somewhere. But yeah, I guess it depends on the libraries, and maybe there are some that's possible. And the other question was about using Notable. I was using Notable here today mostly because I was thinking of a wide audience. Like many people might have not used Jupyter Notebook, and you will have to download like a software for Jupyter, and you have to install Python and things like that. So I just thought like Notable is easier because you can just register and run the code there. You don't have to set up the Python environment yourself. With Kaggle, I think Kaggle have a similar like advantages. You don't have to install the things yourself, and Kaggle has a lot more data sets. It's like basically a machine training community. So it has a lot of online resources of people doing machine learning and having a lot of data sets. You can copy those notebooks, you can fork those notebooks, and that's Kaggle's advantage. And this, I'm also using Notable mostly because of this plugin that came out really recently. And it could just like you see, I was putting in basically 4 messages in ChatGPT, and it runs in Notable directly. And I don't think there's similar stuff for Kaggle or Jupyter yet.
No, thank you, Yuxi. And Sharon has just put some helpful information about our tutor tool developed by a professor at South Dakota State. So thank you very much for that, Sharon. James just had a question, kind of a quick one. Does Kaggle have the ChatGPT auto interaction plugin? So if you can answer that, Yuxi, and then kind of give the general thoughts, and then we'll start to wrap up. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know of that right now yet. So I think Notable is the only one for now, and like Code Interpreter is probably the thing we're looking to afterwards, but it might come out anytime soon. Jeff, can I just go ahead and share the rest of the?
Yeah, please. Yeah, the big picture,
Okay.
and to some degree you answered through Timo's question some of the issues, but please, yeah, please go ahead, Yuxi.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think this part I'm just gonna give a few conclusions what to expect. I think what ChatGPT is doing right now is making logics more important than the grammar, syntax, vocabulary of any coding language. So if you're learning coding before, it might be really important to remember how to write that special function, how to write a variable, how to write a way to loop through different things. But now, as long as you have the idea, you can ask ChatGPT to write down. So I'm like much happier that I don't have to struggle when I forget how to write code, but as long as I know what I want to do. And also ChatGPT is making learning one programming language with the background of another much easier. For example, if you're a JavaScript developer and you're learning Python, and like ChatGPT can just translate different programming language already. And yeah, it's making learning this way much easier. It's making, I think, by learning by doing rather than learning by remembering, all rote learning. And the second thing is this fast changing future that we mentioned. I think someone made a metaphor that this is like the age of when you have used the cargo hose for transportation for over 100 years, and now you just have cars coming in. Right now, it might still be uncomfortable, like the cars might still not run that well. It's the first car ever. But this is going to take over, like this is going to be the future. And this is the stage where large language model and ChatGPT are right now. Like these are really, really early stages, and they still have a lot of pitfalls, but they have so much space that future development might be able to overcome those disadvantages. What's the value of us? What should we do? I think it's a good thing that we could start learning effective prompting, basically how to interact with ChatGPT, with AI in general. There are already job descriptions like prompt engineer. It's probably not that complicated, or like I don't think the job itself will take over, but I think it's a good thing that we can already learn about what are the good practices when communicating with ChatGPT or communicating with AI, because we will do a lot of that in the future. Another thing, I think research will be super important. As you can see with this example, as long as you know which tools you should be using, if you know Notable and you know ChatGPT, you know where you can run the code even though you don't know how to code, you are already like 25% finishing the task, I think. So research could be really important. And then human interaction would be super important. I don't think journalists would lose their jobs, because those things like going into the field, discussing with the expert, holding governments accountable, those things can never be replaced by large language models. It could be assisted by large language models, but it can't be replaced. And the last thing I think is to try things out. That's the big message. You might not follow what I was showing here if you have never touched code, but you can just actually throw any problem to ChatGPT. It's really easy. It's user-friendly interface. If your camera is not working, you can ask ChatGPT, and to see if it like just play around with it and see if it gives you good suggestions or not. I'm gonna share really quickly 2 minutes about some of the things I didn't cover.
Yeah, can we just stop there for 1 second, and then we'll get
okay.
back, just because folks are starting to hit up against the hour. So thank you again very much to Yuxi. Fantastic work. Fola will put the information in the chat, both about the evaluation and about our next training, which is on June 20th, about open source intelligence. So please do, we take the evaluation very seriously. We look to learn, look to work and improve. And then for those folks who need to leave, we are coming up to the end of the hour, but Yuxi will stay on for just a few minutes afterwards to share some additional resources, and those will also be available in the slide deck and so on. So, thank you very much for that. And Timo, just so you know, we will welcome you and send out invites, and that link will go in the chat right now for our next session and the evaluation. So thank you. And then Yuxi, back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Yeah, I just want to mention, if you're a more advanced user, you can try like API, OpenAI API as well. When you first register, it gives you $18 credit, and it's charged by tokens. So basically how much text you feed into ChatGPT and how much text it gives you back. It's cheaper than monthly subscription on ChatGPT. It's really hard to get to like $20 if you're using API. It is slower compared to ChatGPT, but there are more models to choose from. And for example, if you're looking to write a more creative stuff, you might choose a different model. And there is no limitations on 25 messages per hour for GPT-4. So these two are some of the tutorials we can find online on how to use API. You can, like, it's still ChatGPT, it's the same model, you're just using it in a different way, in a less user-friendly way. Some other tools and plugins, Perplexity, it's a great tool for doing research. ChatGPT only have data until 2021. Perplexity is using the same model, but it can go online to search for stuff for you. And they will have those annotations of where it got the information from, so you can double check and you can go to the source of that information. OpenAI Whisper is something that you can use to transcribe text, recordings to text. I think that could be useful to some journalists, but I think you can only access that through API. You can use ChatGPT to edit articles, or if you're having writer's block, or if you want to just make it having better languages. I do that a lot because I'm not a native English speaker. For people who are learning coding, you should definitely try Copilot. It's basically similar to using ChatGPT, but inside your Visual Studio software, you can just write a comment and complete the code for you. Gen AI, for people who are learning to code, so for now, when I'm in Notable, it will just give me an error message, but with Gen AI, if you install the library, it will give you why you are wrong and the suggestions of how to go ahead as well. There are already plugins for scraping software. There's one called Scraper. I haven't tried it out. It's in the plugin store in ChatGPT. You can just feed the URL to ChatGPT. And another use case I heard from, if you are a programmer yourself and you don't like writing comments, I don't like writing comments, so I end up with code that I don't understand after half a year. Like something I wrote half a year later, I look at it, I have no idea what it means. But you can ask ChatGPT to write comments to your code, so it will explain like what your code is doing and make it much more readable and easier to work with in the future. Some additional resources, Lisa by deeplearning.ai, they have developed a ChatGPT prompt engineering for developers. So just basically tell you how to write prompts. And it's not like not super technical. And you can, and there's one about building systems with ChatGPT, is more like building softwares. And this is a slideshow about ChatGPT in journalism. And if you want to follow up with the latest news on OpenAI, ChatGPT, you can join their Discord channel, and there are Discord channels for Perplexity. Like for all these tools, there are Discord channels, and there are where people are having discussions and about new things coming out and so on. There are already, I think, iOS for application for ChatGPT, and we're looking forward to the Android. And if you have any questions, you can contact me here. This is my email, and I will be really happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you so much, and thank you for people who stay, who were so patient with me and stayed until the last.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Yuxi. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so in just a minute, I'm going to be putting the link to the OSINT training. We have the second part of our OSINT training coming up on the 20th of June. So I'll be putting the registration link into the chat box so that if you haven't registered, if you registered and attended the first one, you can also continue with this. But even if you didn't attend the first one, you can also register for this one on the 20th and, you know, participate in the training. Also, there's a quick survey just after this session. It will come up in your browser. It will be very nice of you to help us and fill that. Jeff, go ahead.
No, thank you very, very much, Fola. And yeah, thank you, Catherine, for the question about the first one. We're working on uploading the first one, and I think one person, yeah, Yusuf had a question about posting the YouTube channel. So I've put our YouTube channel in the chat. I want to again thank Fola for terrific organizational work, Yuxi for a fantastic presentation and persisting through some tech challenges, and other members of the team and community for joining us, and everybody else, of course, for being here. We really welcome you to be part of our community. So if you're interested in joining us, please let us know. We have information about that. No problem at all, Winston. We have that. And of course, we welcome to continue the conversation around republication. So thank you all very much. This will be posted on YouTube, and have a lovely day. Thank you again so much for joining us.